What is the most horrifying piece of information you have to share? On February 3, 1998, 20 people died when a cable car situated near the ski resort town of Cavallese, Italy plummeted to the ground from 260 feet. It was caused when a United States Marine Corps EA-6B Prowler aircraft, which was flying excessively fast and too low during a low-altitude training mission, ultimately severed the cable that supported the cable car as it was descending from Mount Cermis. The disaster has been named the Strage del Cermis, Massacre of Cermis, in Italy. The pilot, Captain Richard J. Ashby, and his navigator, Captain Joseph Schweitzer, were ultimately deemed not guilty of involuntary manslaughter and negligent homicide for their roles in the disaster. However, they were found guilty of obstruction of justice and conduct unbecoming an officer and a gentleman upon being found to have destroyed camcorder footage recorded from the plane's cockpit. For a lot of people, the first sign of cardiovascular disease is sudden death. My husband thought he'd pulled a muscle. It kept getting worse, so finally in May we went to urgent care. He was having a heart attack, but the tech doing the ECG was confused and went to get the doctor. The ECG machine was showing a heart attack. His blood pressure, though, was on the low end of normal. If they'd just taken his blood pressure, they'd have said he was fine and sent him home. Thankfully, when he said his chest hurt, he got jumped to the front, and then when the doctor confirmed that the tech was reading it right, they put him in an ambulance over to the university hospital where the cardiac team is. Looking back, there were probably a couple of smaller ones over the past 2 years. They put in a stent, and he's doing well now, but if you're having what feels like muscle pain in your chest but haven't done anything that would cause it, please consider getting it checked. My husband is at a healthy weight, walks everywhere, has great blood pressure, but he still had a heart attack. Carbon dioxide was blamed for the deaths of around 1,700 people in Cameroon, West Africa, in 1986 when a massive release of gas occurred from Lake Nyos, a volcanic crater lake. The clinical findings in 845 survivors seen at or admitted to hospital were compatible with exposure to an asphyxiant gas. They were just sleeping when the lake released a giant cloud of CO2 and wiped out almost an entire village. I work in the fire protection industry. We use a lot of different chemicals to extinguish fires in server rooms, high-voltage switchboards, etc. Honestly, CO2 exposure would not be a great way to go, but you would most likely be so disoriented that you wouldn't know what was happening to you. Sometimes when an elderly person falls and ends up with a broken hip, it's actually the hip breaking that causes the fall. If you have elderly people in your life and they have their first fall, it really is the signal to the end. Once you start falling, your quality of life is going to go down quick. Sure, I had a grandpa that fell at 85 and didn't pass until 89, but every single elderly person who falls really is on a ticking clock. During the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster, the flight data shows that the astronauts turned on their internal oxygen supplies after the explosion. So it's likely that some of them were still alive when they hit the water. Big Bird was also supposed to be on that shuttle until they realized it would be a logistical nightmare to fit him in there. So somewhere in the infinite universes, Big Bird fucking died on national television in front of millions of children. The American blood supply runs on about a 2 to 3 day buffer for most products. If for some reason the entire system shut down for a couple of weeks, people would die for lack of transfusions. And while at least 60% of our citizens are eligible to donate blood, only 5% of those people ever will. If that number went to around 8%, no blood bank would ever need to call you again. Scarier than this. If you are seronegative and you donate once, you will never stop receiving calls to donate as long as you live. My husband is seronegative, universal blood donor, and I'm AB+, universal plasma donor. We joke that we've got everyone we love covered in case of emergency, but the pandemic made us realize that there might actually be a situation in which that would be needed. We both donated at that point and were each getting a lot of calls. When Judith Barcy, the voice of Ducky in The Land Before Time, was murdered by her father, she was halfway through doing voice work for All Dogs Go Heaven. Her last recorded voice lines is her goodbye to Charlie, played by Burt Reynolds. Reynolds recorded his lines after her death. It took him 63 takes to get through it, and you can tell he's barely keeping it together when doing the scene. That the leading cause of death for a pregnant woman is murder. Only in America, though. In Western Europe it's hypertension from high blood pressure and heart failure. Make of that what you will. There are orphanages full of kids who will never be adopted, and many might not live long enough to graduate from the facility. The reason is that these are kids rescued from, or abandoned by the child trade. They have an eclectic selection of STDs. HIV is rife. And most have major emotional/psychological issues from the abuse they suffered. In what countries are these orphanages located? The one I saw depicted was in Cambodia. But if I recall correctly, the narration said similar places were in Laos and Thailand. I did some work in Cambodia with these groups. The amount of girls under 12 who were in the S-trade is fucking disturbing. What's worse, the Western men who go there to do it. Was once in a Mexico Telegram chat where someone posted content for sale. I think it might have been by accident because it was only there for a minute, but it was more than enough to absolutely change my entire view on humanity. I cried and just felt broken. It was pure evil. It was absolutely disgusting. It was professionally produced like adult stuff, and the worst part was that there were babies and the sick person claimed to have terabytes for sale. The world is sick and twisted. A family member of mine worked in S-crimes for their entire career and primarily worked with CP and child abuse. I've been wooed with some stories and cases that they worked on over the decades. I guarantee that the idea most people have in their head of what this stuff looks like doesn't come anywhere close to what happens in real life. The level of degeneracy and sin is unfathomable. I can't even think of a word that describes it. It's almost satirical how bad it can get. I met a Holocaust survivor when I was in 8th grade. He told me there was a pregnant woman who silently delivered her baby during roll call. Standing up, blood and premature child running down her leg. She carefully dug a hole in the snow with her heel and buried the child. He also talked about how cold his feet were all throughout the winter. Every time I walk outside in the cold with my bare feet, I think about that. I also met a survivor when I was in school. He told us about a newborn baby that was smuggled by the women at the camp because they didn't want it to die. Mother had been killed, but the soldiers didn't realize she had a baby. They managed to feed the kid for a while and would wrap its mouth in cloth if it started crying. If the soldiers knew about the baby, they'd shoot it. I don't remember what he said happened to the baby though. I just know the women kept it alive for a good amount of time and potentially longer. During time working at Pearl Harbor National Memorial, I came across two horrifying tidbits. When the USS Oklahoma rolled over, it trapped sailors inside with no way of rescuing them. Cutting through the hull was impossible. A single gap would have caused the air pocket to collapse and flood the compartment. The workers still heard banging on hull during Christmas, nearly 3 weeks after the attack, and plugged their ears with cotton to drown it out. The second tidbit is that by the time the workers got the ship upright and drained, workers were only collecting bits and pieces of remains. When caskets of the unknown sailors were exhumed to begin DNA identification, they discovered over 100 different strands of DNA from a single coffin. Would have been more merciful to flood the compartment early. Slowly dying over 3 weeks is horrific. It makes sense to tell the families that. No one wants to hear their loved ones suffered even a little bit. Sometimes, in certain situations, the truth is more harmful. L'Angolo di Gigi, the iconic Italian restaurant run by chef Gigi Ferruzzo, left an indelible mark on the culinary scene in the capital of Colombia in the 80s, not only for its exquisite flavors but also for the dark rumors that surrounded it. It was said that the gourmet dishes served there, located on the road to La Calera, were prepared with human flesh. Little is known about Ferruzzo because it's known that he was a butcher from a young age and emigrated from Italy to settle in Colombia. Over time, he began associating with influential politicians in the country, and his behavior changed so much that many compared him to a mobster. Rumors spread that these politicians were not only his friends but also the ones supplying the bodies he allegedly used in his cooking, because a supposed former member of the secret police claimed that the bodies from the wars against guerrillas and drug trafficking were sold to Ferruzzo, and that, on the day of the Palace of Justice siege, he was allowed to select the plumpest corpses. To this day, the whereabouts of these people are unknown, and that is why one of the theories is that he cooked them and fed them to his diners. The situation worsened when restaurant employees began to suspect something was wrong, as Ferruzzo wouldn't allow anyone else to handle the meat because he claimed it was imported from Italy, sent by his sister, although she later denied this. Eventually, after these rumors circulated, L'Angolo di Gigi closed its doors, and Ferruzzo disappeared over 40 years ago, leaving his fate shrouded in mystery. No one knows what happened to him. I'm a vet, and I would say the most horrifying thing I have to tell people is that I can't do anything for their animal. It feels horrible every single time I have to discuss palliative care or talk about it perhaps being time for their animal. Thank you for doing what you do. I'm sure it sucks telling people those things, but hearing it from a good vet makes a big difference. People can tell when you care, too. Absolutely. The vet who told me it was time for my baby was being very proper, very medical focused, about our options. I asked her what she would do if you were her cat. She stopped, sighed, and said she would choose to have him euthanized because the little bit of life he would live if we took him home would be extremely short and painful. It was because of her humanity in that moment that I was able to make that decision without any regret. That means a lot to me every day. Rest in peace, Frito. That doctors admitted to euthanizing patients at Memorial Medical Center Hospital in New Orleans during Hurricane Katrina because their only other option was to leave them to die. Several were charged but have defended their decisions as the only humane choice in an impossible situation. One patient in particular was not terminal, but due to his size, was unable to be moved. I knew her, lost touch when I moved away after Katrina. I don't believe it was done out of malice. It really was a horrible situation that they were faced with. I was there during Katrina. It was a very unnerving feeling to know that you are literally trapped, with no power, water, or food. I've never heard quiet like I did trying to sleep on the second floor of a building with 4 feet of water in the first floor. While everybody assumes child SA perpetrators are creepy old men, about a third of all youth abused or abused by other youth. The history of gynecology and the father of it is quite horrific to learn about. He essentially experimented on slaves without any form of anesthesia. Our crew went out to a mall to do some repair work in the main electrical room. The area around one of the main electrical panels was cordoned off with safety tape. The entire top half of the panel was mostly fused. What wasn't fused together was badly burnt and melted. When we had all gotten into the electrical room, our boss closed the door and said, "Full disclosure, that smell is burnt flesh." A maintenance man was working on the panel when a pry bar he had used to get the dead front off fell across the main lugs. Fortunately, he did not survive. You will all be wearing full hazmat gear while working in this room. EMS did try to get as much of him as they could out of the panel, but there may be some residue. Prions, also known as a misfolded protein in the brain that causes other proteins to misfold. This literally causes sponge brain or large holes in the brain. It is always fatal, and there is no known cure or treatment to slow the progression. Prion disease can be contagious or genetic. The contagious form cannot be killed by extreme heat, meaning that people with prion disease who have to have surgery, those instruments used during surgery cannot be sterilized. The most prevalent contagious form of prion disease is bovine spongiform encephalopathy, also known as mad cow disease. Chronic wasting disease, CWD, is another common form of prion disease, which affects mostly deer. While there are no human cases of CWD, it is theorized that the disease could be capable of infecting humans. Prion disease can also be sporadic, meaning the cause is not genetic or contagious, ultimately unknown. The most common form of prion disease, CJD, is mostly sporadic. Prion disease can lay dormant in the body for years. But once it is activated, the average prognosis is about 1 year. TLDR, prions make holes in your brain that you will ultimately die from. It can be contagious, genetic, or idiopathic. Once the disease is active, you have, at most, a couple years to live. There is no cure or treatment to slow the disease at this time. On very rare occasions, a corpse can give birth. If a pregnant person dies, then certain results of decomposition, such as bloating, can force the fetus out of the womb, giving the illusion of corpse birth. I lost my leg to a bug bite that I had no knowledge of getting. One day my ankle swelled up and I thought it was just me getting old. It got progressively worse. This was during COVID, so I didn't have a lot of options. After being up for a few days from pain and running a fever, I went to the emergency room and was diagnosed as having a sprained ankle. They gave me pain medication which helped me sleep. I woke up after 18 hours to blisters under my ace bandage. I don't have any memory of anything until I woke up after my third surgery of them removing more and more of my leg. It was necrotizing fasciitis. I lost everything from a medical misdiagnosis. I am currently just about starving to death as disability doesn't pay enough, even though I worked my whole life and did everything I was supposed to. Gaze detection. The human brain seems to be able to sense if someone is staring at us, even if we do not see the person at all. This ability has probably protected us from predators. So, if you have sometimes felt that someone was staring at you, chances are someone really was. The adoption industry, especially infant adoption, is actually human trafficking, and sometimes genocide, dressed up in a social justice trench coat. It's actually a multi-billion-dollar industry that quite literally profits off selling children. Just Google Georgia Tan or the 60s scoop. Adoption has a long history of being used as a tool of genocide and colonization, especially for Native communities. It disconnects a person from their culture and community, which was what was done to me. Even foster care is highly questionable. It emerged around the same time that enslavement was ended and was utilized as a way for farmers to get free labor. Nowadays, states steal money from foster children and roughly 90% of them will be abused within the system. Most children who are in foster care have some family who want them home. Neglect is often a code word for poverty. My own adoptive parents thought they were saving a baby, but my adoption never should have been legal, and according to the UN it was an act of genocide. My adoption paperwork was edited because I was worth more money without my heritage. I am white presenting. White infants can be worth up to $60,000. The prices are based on ability and race. Adoptees are overrepresented within all psychiatric settings, like inpatient and outpatient facilities, rehabs, the troubled teen industry and psychiatric emergency rooms, which in the US generates even more money. We are 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than the general public. We are also overrepresented within the prison system, again, generates more money in the US, and among serial killers. Further reading and listening. The Byford Dolphin Accident. November 5, 1983. 4 saturation divers were in a decompression chamber which was pressurized to 9 atmospheres, when one of the tenders outside released the docking collar of the diving bell before the diver inside had closed the hatch all the way, resulting in an explosive decompression of the chamber, killing all 4 of the divers and the tender who caused it. The diver who was near the hatch was sucked out of the chamber from a small gap along with all the air rushing out. Due to lack of better words, he was literally turned into pulp and his remains were sprayed all over the deck outside. Morgues prefer to hire women. For the reason you can assume. You can just die completely randomly. I knew a healthy dude in college and he sneezed to death. He sneezed 6 times in quick succession and died of a brain aneurysm. I wasn't there when it happened though. It happened when he was at home. You are not immune to being brainwashed. People don't get sucked into cults because they are stupid. It could happen to you. Also, cults are not always religious. They just often are. Cults draw you in by making you feel smart and appreciated and loved. They douse you in affection and praise, and then they use your trust in them to isolate you from the voices of reason in your life. If someone is being super nice to you for a long time, making you feel special, and then they start telling you that you should cut off multiple people in your life, especially if it's the people telling you that something is wrong, that's a red flag. They will tell you that those people are unsupportive and that you don't need people like that in your life. This is a systematic way to cut off any resistance, so the only reasoning you will hear is their own. And all the while they will seem so kind and supportive. Do not get sucked into this trap. A Quora channel named 911 Graphic Content has a lot of really fascinating and macabre articles on it. 2 in particular spring to mind. One is a personal account of a witness, and another is a scientific breakdown. There's a membership fee to access the articles, but I found them thoroughly engaging and well worth at least a month's payment. The witness was someone doing triage before the towers fell, but after some people jumped. They were putting tags on the people/body/remains they found, so if anyone could survive, the doctors would gauge that at a distance via the colored tags. He came across a woman who had clearly fallen from the building, so at least 50 stories and probably more like 90. Her lower body was destroyed, but her upper torso and head were apparently intact. She yelled at him that she wasn't dead, and to come back. The story is called Black Tag, and you can find it in a few different places, and on a video interviewer with a witness. The implication was that at least one person survived the fall from the towers enough to speak to someone. The scientific breakdown is about how long it would take an airliner to go from nose tip to tail end of the building, and how long it takes for your mind to see, recognize, and understand something happening in front of you. There's a lot of physics mentioned, and at the end of the article is a video where you can test your reaction time. The fastest reaction time image was one I could totally see and understand. The implication is that some people at the very back of Flight 11 and Flight 175 could see the explosion of glass and metal and fire in front of them before they died in the impact.